During the official runnings of the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash in 1971, 72, 75, and 79, as well as the U.S. Express events that ran through 1983, evidence and verification wasn't that big of a deal because there were parties at the beginning, at the end, and usually a time clock that was flown from the starting line to the finish line. Only in 1983 was there really some suspicion or some concern that the David Diem and Doug Turner team in the Ferrari 308 might have used a second car or flown the car, but in fact they just had a spotter airplane. And you can hear a lot more about that in J.Eb Musial's Apex documentary or Corey Wells' 32 Hours, 7 Minutes. But in the more modern era, it is a much bigger deal. But before I dive into that, I want to talk about today's video sponsor, Factor. I tried Factor for the very first time, and I've never really been much of a meal planning guy, but it made my life so much easier and saved me so much time in not having to go to the grocery store while still having amazing meals. And Factor offers an insane variety with more than 35 different meal options, including their Gourmet Plus option. So I got one of those. It was steak, seafood, and everything was cooked perfectly tender, even after you reheat it. I loved it. And right now you can get 50% off your first box and 20% off your first month of Factor by using the code EDBOLIAN50 at the link in the description below. Once again, that's 50% off your first box, 20% off your first month with Factor. Over the last week, I've enjoyed many Factor meals, and I've been impressed with all of them. My kids like them when they eat some of it, and it's always so easy. You just punch a couple holes, put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes, and it comes out perfectly every time. Put it on a plate, it looks great, looks like you've been slaving over a hot stove for hours, but at the end of the day, it gets me done with my meal, back to whatever I need to do, editing videos, doing whatever it is with a car, and I love how efficient, productive, and delicious each meal is. I love that their food is fresh, never frozen. It's all dietitian approved, it's chef crafted, and the composition of the meal is great, regardless of whether or not you're looking to maximize protein, count calories, or just have food that tastes great. I also loved all their different add-ons, in particular their protein shake. My favorite was the cold brew latte. So check them out now at the link in the description below to thank them for their support of vinwiki and eat better with Factor. But since 1983, the advancement of the Cannonball record has taken a very different form. There are still some organized events like John Ficara's the 2904, Ben Charlie Safari Wilson's the C2C Express, the Musket Ball also from Ficara, the revitalization of the US Express by Taylor Hull, and all of these events also have the presence at the starting line, the finish line, the time clock, usually run by Jay Roberts, a really cool way for us to continue to celebrate the history of Cannonball, and once again a situation where timing and verification and everything isn't really that complicated or open to that much debate. But for those of us that really wanted to see exactly what was possible in terms of speed, we did have to figure out different ways to prove it. And the first time that really kind of got called into question was in the debates between Alex Roy and Richard Rawlings about their times in 2006 and 2007. In October of 2006, Alex Roy, Dave Maher, and Corey Wells in a BMW M5 and E39 car ran from New York to LA in 31 hours and 4 minutes, and that was the new record. But they were somewhat concerned about the statute of limitations expiring, and so they wanted to wait to release everything until Alex had finished writing his book, Corey was working on the documentary, and they wanted to stay as safe as possible. During that year, Richard Rawlings and Dennis Collins in a Ferrari 550 Maranello went out and ran 31 hours and 59 minutes. Now, they didn't have a lot of evidence of this time. Richard has a tattoo on his arm, which he would say means that he actually did it. But just because of the way that it happened, it was a very spontaneous bet with Jay Rickey, and they went out from the start of the Bull Run Rally to set their time. And so they didn't have witness reports or anything that really got made public in terms of their evidence. Also, there had already been a faster time that simply hadn't been released. So there was some interesting discussion, but Alex had done as much as he possibly could to prove what they had done. He had witnesses at the start and at the end. He obviously had his gas receipts, his toll records, and Corey had captured video of most of the entire drive. He claimed that it was unbroken. Really, it was overlapping, at least in theory, because there was no media back in 2006 that you could easily afford or carry that would capture a 30-plus hour drive. Now, in 2012 and 13, as I was planning the final stages of my attempt at the Cannonball record, I was not in a position where I could afford a camera system that would create an unbroken file of a 25 to 35 hour drive. So I was going to rely a little bit more on the traditional witness reports. We had a few people that were going to see us along the way and lead us for very small portions of the drive. We obviously had people that were monitoring our location with the third-party GPS tracking that we were using, and we were the first team to ever be able to do that because it was really the first time that that was available on a consumer level. We were able to have a third party that was used for general logistics tracking packages with something that was hardwired into our car. And they were able, when CNN and NBC and Doug DeMuro and everybody else who verified the drive, they talked to this guy that ran the company. He didn't know we were going to use it for exactly this purpose. And he said, we don't want to be seen as the people you use to track this sort of thing. But yes, all of Ed's data is actually true. We also had the metadata on our photos, toll receipts, gas receipts, all the things that you normally would expect to have. Beyond that, there's just the way everything seems. We had a car that was filthy at the end. We had evidence of things that had happened along the way. And we had been building up to this for so long with different people working on the car, preparing the car, and doing everything that we needed to make sure that it all seemed legitimate, because obviously it was. And we didn't run into any real concerns in terms of evidence and verification. But in the years since then, it's been an ongoing discussion. And so today, I wanted to talk about how easy it honestly is to verify that you've done something. However, there are also the risks that you prove it too much, and that creates some likelihood that you might get arrested for even talking about it, the way we saw with Tommy Davies in the UK record. But today there's tons of third-party tracking devices that are available and different ways that you can extract information from your Garmin's, from your phones, and give a great picture of where you are at any point. We also frequently use an app called Glimpse, which is a way to share your live location for free with people who might want to be remote witnesses, or sometimes these modern attempts have a mission control center where they're tracking your live location, making notes of exactly when you get to different cities, monitoring your overall averages, and sometimes that becomes a really cool living and breathing spreadsheet of the witnesses of the run at different moments, and we've used that to verify different runs over the years. Our run was also the first time that metadata was useful as it pertained to the photos, because these digital camera phone photos were also going to have your longitude, latitude, date, and time on the files. Since then, we have seen some examples where that can be modified, but in general, it's usually modified in a fairly clumsy way that upon further inspection, you can figure it out pretty quickly that this is not as legit as it might seem to be. So you've got witness reports, you've got toll receipts, you've got gas receipts. Usually those are just going to be on a credit card. People aren't waiting around to pull receipts out of these machines. You've got third-party tracking, and you've got tracking through apps and GPS systems. You've got pictures of trip screens, monitors of how many miles were put on the car, and things like that. And that becomes a really strong preponderance of the evidence that you've done stuff like this. Something we also like to have here at VinWiki is a lot of pictures. Now, it's easier now with GoPros and Insta360 cameras and things like that to do a 30+ hour time lapse, and something that is really, really useful. Of course, there's different ways that could be sped up or faked and things like that, so it's not the end-all be-all of proof, and that's really the point. There isn't a single end-all be-all of proof, because even unbroken video could be modified and change the way this all looks. Now, I've been extremely fortunate in the last few years as I kind of get inundated with all of these different Cannonball claims that I've got Mason Dibley, Jay Roberts, and Tommy Davies who are always ready to jump in and investigate this data to let us know what they think, to evaluate veracity, and just to make sure that it all sort of adds up and makes sense. Now, that being said, I do not want VinWiki, me, or anything related to a single person to be the governing body, the clearinghouse, or anything like that to verify and certify or officiate Cannonball attempts. What I do love is the fact that the VinWiki YouTube channel has been a great way for people to share these stories and for these Cannonball stories to be immortalized for years to come. Back in 2016, I went to the first Cannonballers reunion that I'd ever had the honor of attending, and one of the coolest things was that they had a panel of the guys from the 70s and 80s who were able to sit up there and tell their stories from those days. And it was very clear to me from the audience that most of these guys had not been asked these questions in quite some time. And Pam Yates and Judy Stropus were there as well, so it's not just guys, so I apologize for being too general there. But these are amazing characters, legends in the history of Cannonball, and hearing them share these stories, I knew immediately we've got to find a way for these stories to live well beyond some of these guys, many of whom have already passed since that meeting in 2016. claim. And so the evidence is a part of whether or not I'm usually willing to run that story. And we did run into issues with Fred Ashmore's run because all the evidence seemed to have been doctored and there wasn't anything, even in his narrative, that would have really proved that he did it. But that's really the point, is that it isn't that hard. If you look at a run like Doug and Arnie's run in 2019 or during their COVID run in 2020, they had a mission control setup that was monitoring everything. They were able to broadcast live video to some of us who were able to watch. I didn't watch the whole thing, but they also had, in some cases, more than 30 spotters along the way that could witness different chapters of the drive, people at the start, people at the finish, people at the fuel stops. And so there was just a huge preponderance of evidence, plus third-party tracking, plus metadata on everything, plus receipts and all the things that just make it make sense that they did what they were claiming to do. So that takes the guesswork out of it. And so if you are looking to go out, do something illegal, be able to prove it, but not necessarily incriminate yourself, this is sort of the guidebook to go by. Now, of course, you shouldn't do any of this. It is dangerous. It's a bad idea. There are risks involved. Obviously, make sure you have the ticket clinic on speed dial for such things. But when you get to the end of it, you can end up with a great story to tell and enough proof that other people might be willing to let you tell it, maybe even here in the vinwiki chair. And as you do, I hope that you'll enjoy a nice glass of Vin whiskey. Mm. It's delicious. So come out this weekend on Sunday. We're having the Vin Whiskey launch at ASW. I'll also put a link in the description below of how you can order a bottle of Vin Whiskey from other states in the US. But also be sure to check out Factor at the link in the description below. Get a discount on your first box and your first month of Factor's meal planning kits. I know that you'll love it.